Today's tutorial is on the formal letter of complaint used by students from Form 1 to 3 and also for the CXC level. Now for the CXC level, the formal letter of complaint is for basically question 2, that it is a possibility that it can come for question 2, which covers a variety of different topics. Now, this slide will cover all the elements of the formal letter of complaint. Now, the first aspect of the formal letter of complaint is the sender's address. Now, this letter is based on the block style. If you use the indented style, it is not a problem. It should not affect your marking or in terms of your presentation to your teacher or your tutor, etc. You can choose whichever style you would like to do your letter. However, this presentation is based on the block style. It means that everything is done against the left margin of your page. So the first thing that you will have is the sender's address. I'm using this as an example. The sender's address here is number 2700 Naparima Mayara Road, Clearwater, Rio Claro. It is important to note that each element of the address is also separated, and you should use punctuations in your separation, commas, and then finally a full stop. So notice that the road is separated from the area or the village, and then you would also have your city. Okay, so each element is separated. So a lot of students sometimes attempt to write everything in one line. You should not do so. You should separate every aspect of your address. So after that, you would skip one line. After that, you would have your date. Your date is very important. May 15th, 2020. Very simple. After that, you skip one line. Now, constantly you would see that we have to skip one line, and everything is in a done in a uniform way. In this method, we mentioned the block style. It means that your letter should be very uniform. It should be done in a particular way that is noticeable, that is very neat, and each aspect, it should be easily identifiable. So after your date, you skip one line. Then you move on to the recipient's title and address. So recipient will be the person who would be receiving the letter. In this case, we have the manager, which is the title of the recipient. Now, a lot of students again leave out this part. It is important that you include this part, the manager. If it is that the recipient has another title, you make sure to include the title. And then you have the name of the business, which is Excel Fashion Boutique. And again, notice the use of punctuation, and the high street is separated from Rio Claro. So the street is separated from the city. So again, it is in a uniform fashion, and every aspect is separated using punctuation, which is most times the comma and then the full stop. So then we skip one line, and then we have the salutations, which is, in this case, if you do not know the person's name, you can always put dear sir or madam. If you know the person's name, then you put dear Mr. or Mrs. or Miss, and then you state their name. Okay, so salutations is important as well. Then again, you skip one line. Now again, this is block style. So instead of indenting, each time we move to a new part or a new element of your letter, instead of indenting, we skip a line. If you are doing the indenting style, then you would not skip any line. You would, for each aspect, you would indent accordingly. So paragraph 1, using a formal tone. Now the use of a formal tone is very important because you are writing a formal letter of complaint. You are not writing a letter to a friend or anybody that you assume to know or to be friendly with, right? You are writing a letter that concerns a situation which is of importance to yourself or your community, etc. So using a formal tone, introduce the purpose of the letter briefly. No details of the complaint should be included. This paragraph may be 3 to 5 lines. So this paragraph can actually be a short paragraph. It does not have to be a long paragraph. Again, you skip one line. This is to separate your paragraphs. Again, instead of indenting for the block style, we skip a line. Paragraph 2. Using a formal tone, discuss the actual complaint in detail, including the details of the situation as it occurred, approximately 8 lines. So in this paragraph, whatever the complaint is about or the incident that has affected you or has affected someone in your community, etc., you are to explain it in detail so that the person who is receiving the letter would understand the main purpose of the letter, the main purpose in detail. Again, you skip one line because you are moving to another paragraph, which is paragraph 3. Discuss how the effects of the situation, how it affected you and may have affected others, including the organization. So in paragraph 3, you are moving away from actually describing or discussing the situation as it occurred to discussing how it affected you and others, and how it may also affect the organization, whether it be a store or whatever organization that you are writing the letter to, because sometimes it does have an effect on the organization itself. And again, to move on to your next paragraph, you skip one line. Paragraph 4, which is the last paragraph, using a formal tone, make a recommendation in consideration of the complaint made. Avoid insults or threats. A lot of times in reading students' essays, when you write, make a recommendation, or for their final paragraph, they start making threats to the organization, which is not necessary, and it would not, if this letter was pertaining to a real life situation, making threats to an organization would not create any sort of impact on them. It will not help the situation or help them to make a positive decision towards helping or assisting you in any way. To note, so we're going back a little bit on your fourth paragraph. Again, still using a formal tone, make a recommendation. So you should make a recommendation. It doesn't make sense complaining about a situation without having some sort of recommendation, because before you had actually written a letter of complaint, you should have analyzed the situation and thought of what could possibly be done. So you make a recommendation in consideration of the complaint made. Avoid insults or threats. You skip one line again, and then you have finally what is called your complimentary close or valediction. So that is your closing, and you always use a formal closing. In this case, you can use respectfully submitted, and you write your after that you have a punctuation again, a comma, and you, because it is a formal letter, you place your full name at the end. So it is not a friendly letter where you use yours truly or your friend, etc. You use a formal closing, and you also write your full name. So basically, that is the formal letter of complaint. We will also look at an actual example of a letter. So this will be an actual formal letter of complaint, and we will read it through and analyze again the different aspects of it. So we have here if we remember the slide that we did before, we have here the sender's address. Okay, so this would be your address, and then you skip a line, then you have here we would have the date. Now notice again how we had used punctuations, which is important, and a lot of students leave out these things. We use punctuation and separated all the different aspects of the address, and the date was simply written. We made sure to skip a line between the sender's address and the date. Then here we have the recipient's title and address. Okay, so in this case we are sending it to the manager, and then we have the name of the establishment and we have the address of the establishment separated. We are separating the street from the city, so we are making sure to have everything outlined properly. Now this is very important. This is very important that students do your letter in a uniformed manner, meaning that it shouldn't be done one way today, and then tomorrow you do it a totally different way, and you feel that, okay, I am just trying to answer a question and just trying to get this thing done, and at the end of the day it doesn't matter in which order I'm writing it in, etc. Some students as well fail to try their best to actually memorize the format. Now letter writing is not very difficult. Before the internet was so popular, text messaging, WhatsApp, Facebook, all these different things, this was basically a main method of communication. So you did not have to be the most educated person to actually know how to write a letter, and people would have done it the proper way. The next thing is that letter writing was also done at the primary school level as a requirement for the SEA examination. Just a few years ago, and primary school students would have actually had to learn the same format. So try to resist not learning it, because a lot of students I'm seeing in from 2019 to 2020, and I hopefully not beyond that, students are actually having great difficulty in letter writing, which is like a new phenomenon in education, which is strange. Okay, so we moving on to the actual okay, so we will have to erase this. to be able to move on to the other aspects. So now we have the salutation. So this would be our salutation. Dear Sir or Madam. Again, if you know the person's name, then you can also write it properly. Dear Mr., Mrs., or Miss, whoever. Okay? If you do not know the person's name, then you write Dear Sir or Madam. Right? Your first paragraph should be brief, and it should be in a formal tone. The entire letter should be in a formal tone. This letter serves to inform you of an issue which occurred while shopping at your store on May 10, 2020. The incident involved the return of a blouse which was purchased 2 days before and the poor treatment which I received upon attempting to do so from one of your cashiers. So notice that the actual incident was not explained. It was not explained in this paragraph. It was briefly mentioned in this paragraph. Okay, then we go on to the second paragraph. We have firstly, and notice that we used the word firstly, which is a transitional word, on the 8th of May, and we use dates as well, because we are trying to actually explain and pinpoint to the manager exactly what occurred and on what date, so he or she would be able to track back and be able to try to get the information on their side to assist us as best as possible. So firstly, on 8th of May 2020, my daughter and I visited the store as we usually do at least once a month to purchase some items of clothing for myself and my daughter. My daughter had an important occasion to attend to on the 12th of May. Again, we using dates. So getting her the blouse she always wanted from the boutique was important to her. We are stressing how important it was that she get the item. We purchased the blouse together with other items from the store. On returning to our home, we realized the blouse we bought had a missing button. So we tried to make sure that we explain exactly what is the issue. Since it was a newly bought blouse which was never worn, I decided to exercise our right to exchange the blouse for one which wasn't damaged. On returning to the store, on the date stated above, I went to the cashier to let her know of the situation with the blouse. She promptly claimed that she couldn't exchange it because it was against store policy. I proceeded to show her the receipt and explain to her that I was a regular customer to the store and I know my rights as a consumer. She became irate and told me to step aside as she had other customers to deal with. And even though, now we have a couple of errors here. I supposed to be I. I waited and attempted to get her attention. She ignored me, so I left. Okay, so that would have been explaining what happened, as we had done in the slide previous to this. So this is an actual example, right? So now we have our third paragraph, which is going to attempt to say how it affected us and others. So we'll go back briefly just to make a connection with our slide and what we should have done. Our first paragraph would briefly introduce our concern and our purpose for writing the letter. The second paragraph would go on to explain in detail the actual incident as it occurred and what we are complaining about, therefore a letter of complaint. And our third paragraph would be to state how it affected us and others. So I'm going to read it through. Subsequently, I was quite embarrassed by the treatment I received at the boutique. Furthermore, my daughter had to wear a blouse which she didn't want to for her occasion. While this may seem trivial, to us it was not, as we have been shopping at your establishment for years and was placed in an embarrassing position, and my daughter did not just see the blouse that day for the first time, but had planned beforehand to get it in time for her occasion. This situation presented some inconvenience as the missing button was difficult to replace, as the entire set had to be replaced to make sure the blouse could be fully enclosed. In doing so, it took away from the value paid for the blouse and added an additional cost to have the button replaced. Given the attitude of the cashier, I suppose that this may not have been an isolated incident, and her poor customer relation skills may have affected other customers, and would eventually affect your boutique sales. So this paragraph identified how it affected the writer, her daughter, and how she perceived that it would have affected the store itself and other consumers. Okay, so we are moving on to the last paragraph. The last paragraph is supposed to actually make some sort of recommendation. So I'm going to read it through. Therefore, I would suggest that even if I am not compensated for the blouse and additional expenditures, you seriously consider some form of training program for your workers in dealing with customers and also their rights. In doing so, you would be more of an asset to your community, workers, and customers. I have been a customer this long because I like the clothing which you sell. However, if you do not make some changes in the treatment of customers or formally address the situation, I would no longer be a customer or recommend your boutique as I usually do. I hope that this letter meets your consideration. So that would have been the last paragraph, which would have been your recommendation to remedy the situation. Then you would skip a line and you would have your closing. Your closing would be a formal one. Respectfully submitted, Jenny Weiser. Okay, so we would quickly just go through one more time. From the top, we would have your address or the sender's address. We would have the date. Now notice that we skip a line before or after each aspect. Okay, so we would have your address, skip a line, the date, skip a line. Now it is important in the recipient's address that you also have the title of the recipient. You skip a line, then you have Dear Sir or Madam if you don't know the person's name. If you know the person's name, you should address them by Mr., Mrs., or Miss and their proper name. Then you skip a line, then you have a brief introduction for the purpose of your letter. Then you skip a line, then you have a full explanation of your complaint and what happened. You skip a line, then you have an explanation of the outcome, or basically how the situation had affected you, could have affected other consumers and could have affected the establishment as well. And you skip a line, and for your last paragraph you have recommendation, which you would consistently use a formal tone and be respectful. Skip a line, and then you have your closing, and in your closing you should use a respectful closing, not a friendly closing. So we choose to use respectfully submitted, or you can use respectfully, or some people even use sincerely, and it can actually work. And you also use your full name because it is not a friendly letter. So notice that a full name was written here, first name and surname. So this is basically an example of a formal letter of complaint that can be used from Form 1 straight to the CXC level. So I hope that this tutorial is again useful to you, and it can be applicable to your work. And you should always view your tutorial. You can always go through it, rewind it. You can even look at the example, the wording of it, and use some of the wording in your own letter to gain more practice, etc.